Hi, I'm Rich Tehrani. I am the Group Editor-in-Chief of TMC, and I've got the pleasure of interviewing today Eric Hanselman, who's the Security Architect for IBM. And Eric, please tell me a little bit about why you're here today.
Oh, well, I'm here to provide some security perspective around a lot of the emerging voice technologies that we're talking about here at the Peering Forum. We've looked at a lot of the policy requirements for carriers to be able to peer effectively for a lot of next-generation services. But one thing that often gets left on the table is a lot of the security aspects of how do you lock down what's actually being done behind the scenes to enable these capabilities.
So what are some of those things that you do behind the scenes?
Well, helping organizations to understand that while you can put good policies in place, you also need to make sure the infrastructure is solid underneath it. If you build a house on a bad foundation, it's really hard to ensure that it's going to stay put.
So what's been the response so far?
Oh, very positive. The good news and the bad news is we've got a lot of press about events that have been happening around what happens when you don't put effective protections in place. We've seen a large amount of toll fraud associated with voice over IP. Because it offers a lot of flexibility, it also means that flexibility opens up a lot of places for abuse.
Now, what about the SIP standard? It's very open, and some say that the SIP standard is a challenge for the security industry.
Oh, it is definitely. The SIP standard, as with any kind of standard, has been built with openness and interconnectivity in mind. The problem is, without a lot of hard and fast detail to be able to implement it, it means that implementations don't always align correctly. And when those implementations don't align, that means there's a chance that someone can take advantage of the gaps left and jump in and abuse them.
So by gaps, could you elaborate a little bit?
Oh, sure. If you take a look at SIP interchange, SIP was really built with a lot of the same design goals that the email system was built.
Sure.
So if you think about easy to use, human readable, things that are very easy to understand and that are built on an expectation of trust. So the expectation is the person that I'm having a conversation with, I'm going to trust. There have been some overlays to be able to go fix some of this, but at the end of the day, because that implicit trust is built in, it's easy to abuse.
So would something like a buffer overrun be the kind of problem that you're talking about?
Oh, no, actually, I was talking about some higher level issues about being able to simply masquerade as someone you're not. One of the problems with a lot of common service offerings in the VoIP space is that while service protection for payment is reasonably robust, when you start looking at the problems around actually determining the person that you're talking to is who they say they are, the protections aren't really there. So there have been a number of well-publicized incidents of attacks where callers impersonate or misrepresent who they are. We've gotten to a point where we expect that caller ID, when we get it on the phone, is actually telling us who's calling. Right. There have been a number of recent attacks where it's fairly easy to be able to push out a phone number that's not really your own number and masquerade as someone else. A large wire transfer company this spring was hit with significant losses because their policy said, oh, if it's under $300 and the calling number seems to be the person who owns the account, we'll accept it and not verify it. The problem that they run into, of course, is that it's really easy to create, with VoIP phones, it's really easy to create that number and be someone you're not.
So I've heard some people say that if you have an encrypted SIP standard and you use encryption, the problem then becomes that you don't know what's in the payload, and there could be malicious programs and things like that in the payload of the messages. Is that a challenge?
Oh, it is definitely. The difficulty that then brings up is now you've got a little more confidence about the person to whom you're talking, but that means that it's really hard to observe what's actually being exchanged. So now a lot of the tools that we used to have that would actually observe that conversation are blind to what's going on underneath the hood.
So it's fair to say that as IP communications gets more complicated, you've really got to stay on top of the industry, and you've really got to stay involved to be one step ahead of the evildoers.
Very definitely. Well, what you'd mentioned earlier about buffer overflows. I mean, we've been dealing with buffer overflows in the traditional IT security space for a long time. In telephony, we've always had a long history of systems, robust, well-protected systems that were well built with good software. And now we're to a point where we've got flexibility to run, voice software on all sorts of regular PC platforms. So suddenly, now we've opened the door to all these other problems that have plagued us in other areas. So you're absolutely right. You now have to look with a much broader view to be able to effectively deal with security.
So really, security convergence itself is becoming a very large industry.
Oh, yeah, very definitely. There are just so many aspects now to deal with the fact that you're blending together a lot of these technologies. You've got the risks associated with both now.
Well, thank you very much, Eric. This has been a Voice Peering Forum Winter 2007 interview here in New York. My name is Ritz-Carlton with TMC. Thank you very much for listening.